Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another of our Inside Coach conversations here with Beyond Pulse. Thank you all for joining us today on this Thursday in week 11 of lockdown. As always, we greatly appreciate you guys tuning in and choosing Beyond Pulse as your dose of coaching education for the day. Absolutely delighted today to introduce a man who candidly needs no introduction. But Mr. Todd Beane is our esteemed guest, who's obviously joining us all the way from sunny Spain. So alongside me, Tom Shields, is Mr. Marc Wilson. But we thank obviously Todd for the time that he's given to us today, and obviously the wonderful insight that he's about to share with you all. Many of you will need no introduction to Todd and the great work that he's doing across the youth soccer and coaching space, both in Spain and obviously trickling into impacting work that's been done here in the US and across the world as well. But we will of course allow him to give a little introduction. So Todd, as we said, thank you so much for taking some time out today to join us. For the benefit of people who may be a little less familiar with you and the esteemed background that you have, please do take a minute or so just to provide some insight into yourself and to the work that you do at TOVO. And then obviously we'll be able to dive into the conversation as we're going to explore some contemporary issues in coaching ed and enjoy a presentation from yourself. So over to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks guys for having me back. Yeah, just a brief story. I grew up kind of American suburbia kid, playing different sports, focusing on soccer, moving into to Dartmouth College, and then working my way up, just playing, coaching, teaching through the old days of the USISL. And then fast forwarding into the early 2000s, I got a call from Johan Cruyff, an opportunity to come here to Barcelona to work with Johan on developing two major projects. One was the Cruyff Institute for Sports Studies, and the second one working in consultancy as Johan was restructuring his second club first in Barcelona, and then going back 2010 to 15 to restructure his maternal club at Ajax, and subsequently working with Mamelodi Sundowns, Chivas Guadalajara, LAFC, and a couple others. And upon the diagnosis of Johan's illness, planning for a future that we hoped would not have to have come, but came earlier than we would have liked, and created TOVO, which stands for Total Football, honoring Johan's vision of football. We created TOVO basically as a means to give children the opportunity, young players the opportunity to come to Barcelona for a train abroad program, and then kind of grew organically from there into offering coaches asked what kind of methodology we're using, why it was different, and it really forced me, more than anything, forced me to be disciplined to put our methodology into something more concise and more palatable for people worldwide that aren't fortunate to live in Spain and get the culture that we have here. And so we created TOVO Institute as a chance to do online, offline, on-site programming focused around a really core fundamental of kind of promoting training that maximizes the potential of children and coaches. So it's a wonderful journey. I'm not a young pup anymore, so it's been nice to reconnect again with old friends and come back to meet new friends like Marc at the convention and Tom, our connection and many others. So it's kind of connecting Barcelona back with my roots back in Connecticut and California and everywhere in between. It's been wonderful. But as I said, extraordinary in the sense that I've been very lucky, but much like your guests, just somebody who loves the game enough to stay involved with it for a while.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that. It's a very humble overview of what has been quite an extraordinary journey, and obviously the work that you do speaks, just looking at some of the names that have popped up and the impact that you've had on people who are tuning in to listen again. So on behalf of those guys and obviously us, again, thank you for what you're doing and for being here today. To the guests that are joining us live, obviously you have the chat function. The way that this is going to work is Todd is going to go through a presentation that he's prepared for us. Again, the focus being on exploring coach education and maybe kind of rethinking and redesigning the way that you approach it. At the end, there'll be plenty of time for questions, but if you do want to pop up in the chat function throughout the presentation, if you have a question surrounding any of the content or conversation that Todd's engaging in, obviously please just pop up in there and I'll do my best to redirect our attention to it. And then obviously at the end of it, we'll open up the floor for further dialogue. So without further ado, Todd, we'll turn it to you and obviously the presentation that you've kindly prepared for us today. So thank you.
Yeah, and as I said, I appreciate the invitation, and my charge was to take a look at kind of specifically about coaching education as opposed to some other topics we've been discussing about player development. And so it's something that's dear to my heart, because I think if we can have some really positive impact as colleagues, then we're talking about influencing the development of, really millions of children that'll be in our charge collectively. So I think every coach has probably a minimum of 20 kids, and many are coaching more than that over a season or over several seasons. And so the objective of this is just take a look at how we structure that coaching education. So, here's my colleague Oscar that works with me from Barcelona, Johnny, a player there in the middle, who is a Seattle player, came here and has played professionally after leaving TOVO. And I think this is kind of how I look at coaching in general, is that the protagonist has to be Johnny. Protagonist has to be, and then flanked by people. Well, the guy on the right might not be so useful, but at least Oscar's useful in facilitating their journey, right? So we talk about 2 layers of journey to extraordinary here at TOVO. One for our players and where they hope to be and what their aspirations are. And that's the critical component of coaching. And then coaching education's journey is your audience now, and we talk about how do we journey to extraordinary such that we're better at what we do in facilitating this protagonist's opportunities. And so I'm going to kind of play a little bit off of Arsen's words here. He mentioned that the problem in football is that you learn how to play the wrong way around. That first you focus on execution, then decision making and perception last. And I don't want to get caught in semantics, but I took a little twist of that, because thinking of today's presentation, I think the process may be also twisted the wrong way around in football in terms of coaching education. I think the problem with coaching education, if there is one, that we teach the wrong way around. We tend to start with the how and instead of the why, right? And so it's not uncommon that we'll get requests, my colleague and I will requests for the drills that we do, right? What drills do you do at TOVO? And that just kind of makes me cringe a bit, because I'm like, if you're asking for right away for the how without understanding why we do what we do and what we're trying to accomplish, then really the end drills are meaningless. We can download those for €5 or YouTube them for free. So I really always think about coaching education in a different format that it was delivered to me as a young coach. And I want to share that with you a little bit today. And, not in great detail, but at least enough to prompt them some questions about this process. So with our players, but also with our coaches, we always start here with why. Why are we coaching? And so I would encourage in coaching education at every course, start with that workshop. Every time you bring players together, but in our case, we're talking about coaches in a club format or in some sort of organization or association, then we talk about why are we coaching? And when we do that, it really gives us a foundation from which we can depart. But if without starting there, we can get lost on many roads that ultimately become confusing and conflicting. And when we're confused and conflicted as a group of coaches, you can only imagine what goes out to our players individually and collectively. So we always start with that big question mark: why are we coaching? And I've done this now with probably about 1,500 coaches worldwide, from humble clubs on the East Coast of the United States to Ajax, Barcelona, Christchurch, California, and everywhere in between. Always starting with why. And what I find is that when we ask that question, why do you coach? And maybe you can do this on your own as you're listening. If I ask you that question now, why do you coach? And you jot down the answer, what I found is that regardless of whether it's Frank de Boer in a workshop, or whether it's Sky in a workshop, or if it's Dan in a workshop, or it's any level, we answer the question for whom we coach, right? So the why, ultimately, I've never someone say, oh, I'm a youth coach for the money, or because I want to collect trophies, and I want to be the Ayso king, or I want to be the Puget Sound emperor. And that's not why we're in the business. So what I've noticed is if we start with any coaching education, we're not even anywhere near the how, or methodology, or flavor, or brand, or style of football yet. The question that we prompt is why, and the answer we get is for whom. and it's for him or for her. In this case, one of these kids is my son. There's Gavin from Seattle, Kyle from the Oregon area, Portman area. And so why we coach is for whom we coach. And that's critically important in coaching education, whether it's football or ice hockey or probably music or dance or art. You know, why are we going about spending our time and energy to interact with young human beings in a way that we believe is adding value to their lives? And that's the ultimate answer. We want them to have health and opportunity and to follow their ambition and to instill some passion and to take their own journey. But it's critically important, because if we don't start there, then I think we end up with confusing and conflicting subsequent or sequential lessons of coaching education that can easily get lost and really cause more damage on occasion than good. So then the next question, and it's an obvious process, right? Rather than going to the how, I would say, why leads us to a for whom, and we identify that very clearly. And then we say, well, what? What are we really trying to accomplish as coaches? You know, and I just found this picture today on the internet. I'm like, I don't know what that is, right? And oftentimes when I ask clubs or I ask a group of coaches, I say, well, what is it? I get as many answers as to what they're constructing as I do coaches. And so there isn't really a chance to get to how with any sense of coherency, consistency, or continuity, right? For the player. Again, we coach for the player. So everything that we should be evaluated upon is not how well we get along in webcasts and how great we all think we are. The only value we provide in entering a child's life is if that child has had greater joy and learning because of our intervention. There's nothing more than that. Has our intervention led to greater joy and greater learning for the children in our charge? And if it hasn't, the what, the how, the where, and all those details and the X's and O's and the tactical formations are useless. So when we talk about the what, this is where it gets interesting. Because if I ask different coaches, I'll get different answers. What type of, in this case, you know, what type of machine, in this case, are you creating? I mean, what is the ideal? I can't even evaluate what's on your screen there. I don't know if that does what she intended it to do or she's facilitated the success of that. But if you ask a coach, which we do, okay, what is the ideal? What are you trying to nurture in your players? Okay, we know we want to have them learn, but what? We know that they want to improve as athletes and as people, but specifically, what do you mean by that? What is your ideal? What will it look like? The fully nurtured child in your charge, because of your intervention, will have these skills and these qualities or this character, okay? Detail them for me. And as I get different responses, that becomes critically important, because even now we haven't got to the how, right? We can only get to the how if we're clear on our why, we know for whom we're doing it, and we know what the heck we're doing. But I found in working with several clubs, including Barcelona and Ajax, that question is a bit disturbing. Not in the question, but in the responses, like, well, no one's ever asked us that question. We've never been together to discuss that. We've never workshopped that. We get a bag of balls, pennies, and cones, and we get a section of the pitch, and we go out and do our thing. What thing? Well, you know, football thing. And I do rondos, or I do line drills. Those discussions are irrelevant until we've got through the why, for whom, and the what. And once we create a clear picture of the type of player we would like to nurture, I would argue then and only then in coaching education can we even begin to think about what our training, our intervention would look like. I know it's asked backwards, but your listeners won't be the first to call me asked backwards. Okay, I've got my wife saying so almost every day, right? It's a little bit bizarre because we're coaching. So let's just get to the coaching, right? But we want to know why, for whom, and what we're trying to nurture. And then we can go on to the next question of, and this is where we can diverge, right? And you've had me on before, so you know I won't shy away. Some of us will believe that football begins with a ball. And we use the skills of kicking it, receiving it, and passing it, and shooting it, and heading it to be an effective coach. Okay, fair enough. To each his or her own. This is where I would differ. I think that football begins with a thought. I think football begins with concepts, not the execution of concepts. So now you can see how far apart my journey in coaching when I go to the how, then maybe your journey would go. And ultimately, we can both be successful, but we're not on the same coaching path. And if we have children in our charge, there is definitely a disconnect from their perspective on where the heck we're going, even if we share our why. We both care about the children. But when we get to our what, I want my children to be above and anything else, people of great character. I want them to be people of great intelligence. That's where football begins with a thought. So I teach it from that perspective. My how is a perspective of, is that child intelligent with the character and then has the competencies? And what I found is most coaching education programs build competencies, right? Yes, they're critically important. But if you had to prioritize, you start to get back to that question of what the heck am I really trying to nurture? Obviously, I'd like to nurture all of them spontaneously, instantaneously, and everything. Boom, Leo Messi, Alex Morgan pops out. Here we go. But we're going to be on this journey to facilitate the success of another human being. We better be clear about what type of human being we value, be honest with that before we even talk about Scottish football or catenaccio or possession-based football. So in this case, I just want to use an example. Because we believe it's football, because we're taught, we educate our coaches completely differently than maybe the US Federation, the CONVB, the English FA might do. And fair game, that's fine. But it's a departure, obviously. TOVO coach education is not like US soccer education. And it's not about the people or the intent or the why, because we all want our children to succeed. It's because when we got to the what, we started to diverge the way that we approach what we hope to accomplish. So this is a poster child for us, right? We would value one thought is the concept of perceiving your environment. So my coaching education plan would be different than maybe some of your listeners. If you believe that coaching education is about ball striking, then you may build sessions, your how around striking the ball. Okay, I may build my session, my how around perception action, and that's a different departure point. And because it's a different departure point, the child will receive different methodologies, different exercises, different drills, which, as I mentioned earlier, are not worth selling, right? They're not worth buying drills because they're a disconnect from this this intervention, which needs to be coherent, consistent, and continuous for a child to effectively learn in the environment that you provide. So there's our poster child, okay? Now, he didn't say he spent the entire 90 minutes kicking a ball. If he did, he might be the poster child from a few of your other guests, right? But it's not. He's a poster child for me because this type of player, the Cruyffian type of player, the Modric, the Frankie de Jong, the intelligent player who's managing himself, managing space, and then ultimately managing the ball with prowess, is the player that we're trying to nurture. And the how we try to nurture that player will be vastly different at Barcelona than it may be at Glasgow or Dinamo Zagreb or wherever you may be. And that's okay. But each of us would have different interpretations of consistency, coherency, and continuity, if that makes sense. So I'll go through quickly now when we get to the how. And today's session isn't about football instruction, it's about the parameters of coaching education. So now we can start to create our formulas. Only now, I would argue, and this may be, I don't think it's a setting, but it's definitely maybe not common. Only now can I begin to intervene in a child's life. Only now do I have, I believe, either the opportunity, the credibility, or the preparation to actually engage with my first student, my first footballer. And if I haven't done that, and I've come with a journal of drills, this is where I call bullshit, BS, right? This is where I say, no methodology is a collection of drills, right? The homework and the hard part is the why, the for whom, the what really, and then, and only then can I start to select the exercises, those interventions, and the environment in which I hope to intervene, with the language that I hope to use in that intervention, with a learner-centric, coach-centric, dominant personality, authentic self, all of these other elements of coaching. Only now do those pieces become valuable to me as I have my first interaction with the child. Not first lecture, I didn't say that, that might be somebody else, but first interaction with the child. And it starts before I even say, hello, my name is Coach Beane, welcome to Toba. Okay? It's homework. And it's homework that I believe we need to do in coach education. And from the assignment of the coach educators, it's the homework and the processing I think we need to conduct and assign if we hope that any coach in our charge, in our programs, be that at the federation level or the individual private level, hopes to accomplish something of meaning for you as a coach, youth, humble, professional level. And then ultimately, I think, this changes, as we know. I think your audience has been in different jobs, and it's the where. And the why is the where important, because if I go to Barcelona, I don't walk in and say, hey, Todd Beane's here, I'm going to do it my way, I'll see you in June. It's just, that's not how that works, right? Barcelona has a methodology that has been inspired by Johan Cruyff, perfected by many coaches and leaders over the year. They have a director of methodology. They have his assistants that work with them. It bleeds through the men's and now the women's game. And any coach that works there is going to work for Barcelona, not as an autonomous coach doing whatever the hell he or she wants and wearing a logo. And unfortunately, this is where coach education gets engaged with club education. If I have 25 coaches in my club and each have been educated differently and each come with a different what, although we share our why, I don't have a club. I have well-educated coaches who are a consortium of independent entities running autonomous programs that will prejudice the development of a player because there is no continuity, consistency, or coherency in the program that the child receives from our coaching education process. So the where is important in that you understand the culture, you understand the student, and you understand the environment in which you work. If you're given freedom, okay, great, go for it, enjoy it. But I don't think that if you're not working with a colleague next to you about what this pathway is for a child, while you may be reveling in your autonomous structure, I think you are burdening a child with an unclear message as to what the ideal is, and then connected to the how that we're going to process every day on the football pitch. So we've answered some really basic questions, but we've answered them in a different order. And this is where I said, I'll just throw this out there because this may prompt some questions. And it's a selfish one. Okay, so I'm going to just get this way because invariably somebody's going to tweet me saying, oh, you're just out for your selfish interest because you get paid. And I'm going to say, yes, I'm guilty as charged, right? I've written my book, so to speak. I sell my courses. I've been coaching. I've been paid to coach. I've been paid to direct schools. So yes, I'm a marketeer. I'm a salesperson. And I say to those people, if you are not a salesperson every day on the pitch with your child, what are you? You go out, and I don't care if I get paid more or less. And believe me, some of the jobs I didn't get paid anything, okay? I'm a salesperson because when I go out to individually to my team, I'm selling one main concept, that you, the child, or you, the parent who has sent me their child, it's worth entrusting me with a small portion of your or your child's development. I need to sell that. I need to believe in it so passionately, whether I'm paid or not. I need to market that. I need to sell it in a positive way. I need to be so committed to it and so prepared to deliver it that the end facilitation is of value, whether or not it's a €5 program or Frankie de Jong's salary, right? We are like a Montessori school, identifying what we believe is best for the children, and we are presenting that to the world, for profit or for not profit. I just thought of this morning because yesterday I watched what was going to be the launch of the SpaceX mission with NASA, private and public sector. And I appreciate my friends at the Conway Bay and the English FA and the US Soccer Federation. But this is something that may be interesting when you talk about the manifestation of coach education, the implementation of coach education, okay? Are federations the best learning and educational institutions to deliver coach education? I'm not saying they don't. I'm not saying there might be great reasons why they are the only organization that should be able to do that. There may very well be that case. I've really come to question whether or not an organization whose responsibility is to administer football is the best entity to govern coach education. Now, I'm going to make some enemies, I know, but friendly enemies, right? I mean, like, you throw darts at me, but not at me live, right? It's just not the concepts. And I thought about this recently because I'm not sure. When I say I'm not sure, I mean I don't believe that they are. Let me be honest. I don't think a federation, the ones that I've had a chance to see a little bit inside and out, are the best equipped people nor vehicle by which coaches will be most fruitfully and productively and efficiently engaged in a dynamic learning process that makes them a better coach. That's controversial. That we can tweet, right? Not because I'm against anybody in a federation. I'm looking at an organization. And the reason I put this on the picture, because these are the two gentlemen. I apologize for not knowing their names. They will be historic space travelers come Saturday, God willing. They are going to launch from Florida, and they will be the first astronauts to be the products of initiative, the pioneers of initiative that is private enterprise with public enterprise. Only government had the purview previously to put people into space. And then a few crazy people, not just Elon Musk and others, other entities are saying, what happens if private enterprise and other experts outside of the government institution, i.e. largest institution known to spacecraft, were to collaborate or were to yield expertise in some sort of cooperative fashion that brought about a better future as we explore space? If it can be done with lives on the line, then why shouldn't we maybe be questioning the very assumptions upon which we built every coaching education program through every federation in every country in the world? So, okay, like I said, you know me, I'm gonna have to stir something up. So, and it's selfish because I wanna be part of that. I'm not Elon Musk, I don't have the resources, and I'm not that intelligent, but I wanna be part of that dialogue and I wanna be part of that solution. And right now, I may be limited to being part of that because I'm not qualified because I don't have a federation band across my armband here. Okay, so I'll conclude with this and we'll open it up. No matter what we discuss and disagree, what I like about working, Tom and Marc, is that you and I even won't agree on everything. You guys and I and others listening. What I like about it is, and it's really hard to do this on Twitter. You've got to take the high road, but challenging one another's ideas is not the same as challenging an individual. I know that's hard in the American climate because from the very top, that happens, right? If you don't like somebody's idea, you go after the person. I don't think that's productive in coach education. I have great respect for Nico and other people and Claudio when he was involved with the federation, and great respect and relationships with Jürgen, with Bradley, with the guys that lead these organizations, right? There's a national team coach now with Greg. I have conversations with Greg. So it's not about the person, it's about what are we trying to accomplish and what is the how, which how is the most effective. And I think we have to buy into that we are connected by our why is for whom, and then we can have really deep dialogue about how we are best going to nurture Kyle in this picture to maximize his 100%, as Johan would say. And with that in mind, I'll end with Johan's quote. It is for the love of the game. That's our why, for the love of the game, that we want to help this young man or your young men and women improve through learning and joy. And that's the essence for me of coach education, regardless of who's responsible for delivering it. Okay? So I hope that kicks us off with some questions. I want to just say thank you. I know I want to leave most of the time today for your questions, Tom and Marc and others in your wonderful group of Beyond Pulse folks.
Todd, I've got to jump in. That was an incredibly well delivered and insightful presentation. You've got my wheels turning, but I want to start with something that takes me back to the character and intelligence pieces of what you want or you believe are the cornerstones of developing better human beings, in essence. If those two elements of development are going to lead us into the type of adult we'll end up being in later on in life. I read a book recently called The End of Average, and it talks about intelligence being multidimensional.
Yeah.
And three of my favorite reads of the last year have been the performance cortex, leadership and self-deception, and the end of average. And it's kind of a lot of it is based around character development and measuring things that ultimately we tend to do in society. We build an average from something that's multidimensional. So if you talk about height, you can build an average for height, right? Some are taller, some are shorter. If you look at size, it's multidimensional. So if you're a coach and you're looking to measure intelligence in players and map it out, again, look at what is the why, and then what is the what type of intelligence are we looking to develop in these players? How do you measure it with the TOVO methodology? What does that look like in terms of some of the measurables when we're looking at intelligence? For me, I think it's important to look at the 87.5 minutes we spend without the ball, and can you set up sessions to develop and enhance that for the players? And again, some of the characteristics, how do you implement that into the TOVO training methodology, and how as a coach could I notice that developing within some of the sessions that I delivered?
All right, it's a great question. So I always come back to the departure point, and you raised some good points. For example, my son is not very tall, to say the least. Okay, he's out here playing now. At one club, he left, and the coach said, "Listen, little Jordan, we're going to Preferente." So we have relegation and promotion. So this is the top of the top in Catalunya. We're going to next year, and you know, it may be difficult for you. I don't know how many minutes you're going to get because it's physical and it's, you know, it's complicado, they say in Spanish. That's complicated for you. So he made a decision to go to Barcelona, and at Escola Barcelona there, and then subsequently a club just down the street from that club. And in the last 3 years, not once has anybody mentioned his size to him or to me. Okay, why is it important? Because one club created an entire I'd say methodology would be gracious. They just did a bunch of drills, and they went to win with physical nature. So the drills they did and the attitude and the language and the people they selected was all woven into this physicality as being critically important to compete at a higher level. And he went to another club who's known for valuing intelligence, and the trainings are completely different. Now, when it comes to TOVO, you're right. If you look at the TOVO paradigm, we have cognition, which is a process of perceiving your environment and executing within that, perception, action, coupling. And on the other bookend, we have character, which has to do with being positive, ambitious, dedicated, resilient, reflective, and respectful. And those two elements, skills and components and concepts, are transferable. The central component is competence in our 3-pillar process. And so they're critically important: angles, distance, timing, ball control, passing, receiving, shooting, dribbling, etc. Okay? However, what I know about coaching football is connected to what I believe is most important. Because I believe that intelligence and character is good for football and well beyond, I'm going to emphasize that more in my how than somebody who's just teaching somebody to be physical, get stuck in and win a few matches. And that's okay, as long as they're clear about that. And this coach was. To his credit, "Jordan, you're too short. It's going to be complicated." Jordan got welcomed somewhere else, had valued intelligence and management of space. So those bookends, cognition, your intelligence, and your character, are the only transferable elements of our performance metric. Football skills aren't transferable. The research just will share with you is that, you know, kicking a ball is not going to help you become a surgeon. It's not the way it works. But building the character to compete and to learn and to drive and to be resilient when things don't go your well does develop the habits that we would call your character, that you can transfer into every aspect of your life, be that music, science, art, architecture, or anything else. So you made a really good point, and I'll open up to a second question. You measure what you want, but oftentimes in coach education, some new way to measure something came out, so we're going to use this. And you and I have had a lot of conversation about that, because Beyond Pulse is about measurement, right? And we've had great conversations with my colleagues about, but what are we measuring? Are we just measuring what we can and then giving it value because we can? And I'll give you a story about this. I was watching football with Johan Cruyff. We were watching the Barcelona game, and on the TV screen, Xavi came out and he ran 12.1 kilometers. And that came across the stream. Xavi substituted out, 12.1 kilometers, whatever it happened to be. And Johan said, "What's that?" And I said, that's the number of kilometers Xavi ran. He says, what does that have to do with football? And I'm like, I don't know. I know that it's one of the first things that we have been able to measure. And so since it's one of the first things we've been able to measure, we've given it importance, and now we've attached it somehow to the origin of football, which Johan always started with, which is it's not about running. It's about knowing when, where, and why, which is a cognitive process, not a physical activity. Well, they're not in a divorce, it's perception and coupling. So oftentimes we measure what we can measure, and then we add too much value to what we can measure without going back to the, well, even if we can't measure it, what would we do? So then we have to be creative about how we measure. So the way we do that, how do you measure? Well, we have videos, and we do an exercise, a position play exercise. We give certain dimensions, and we video, and we count, and we observe, and we watch how many successful executions of their thoughts have been taking place, how many failures, and are those failures connected to lack of vision or lack of precision? So you can start to catalog these in a more data scientific way, and then you can reduce the space, and then you can check and see, do the possessions go up individually and collectively? And what happens when you do that, and you show the kids their own feedback, you can use a metric that probably isn't perfect, like exact the kilometers or the heartbeat, but you can certainly measure the efficacy of managing oneself, then managing space, and then ultimately, as a consequence, managing the ball through technical precision. So it can be measured, but once again, even in data science, I think we've done it ass backwards. What we measure, we value, instead of figuring out how we measure what we value. Does that make sense? And I know I'm really on a tough line, because I know I'm the Beyond Pulse people, right? But that's what we talked about, and that's what I like about what you guys have done. It's like what you set out to measure may not be exactly what you found out that you are measuring now, and that's dependent upon the person, in our case, the coaching staff, that values something unique. Yeah.
It makes me feel even more vulnerable as a coach to think of the depth of perception and insight I need to have. If I'm asking for that same level of perception from my players, I need to be able to perceive the emotional response and the action consistently throughout a practice, through weeks, months, and years of development, to have that meaningful intervention with those players. And yeah, it makes me very conscious of keeping up. And
let me ask you a question. That's a great comment, because I want to come back to that. So when you did your badges, was one of the highest priorities your coaching education was to teach you how to observe and not speak and not interject and to not give a coaching point?
No.
I asked that question. I'm talking to Marc because I see you there, but I know I have a larger audience. When you did your FD, grassroots, digital, FA, whatever you did, all the way up to UEFA, was one of the highest priorities in coach education is to building your capacity to be perceptive?
Absolutely not.
But I want my players to be perceptive. I would say that we hold ourselves the same accountability. Our capacity to prescribe any intervention only comes off of keen perception and observation, of which I got 0 in my coaching education through the 90s, and I went up to get my A license, right? What did I learn? Okay, now I learned a lot. Now I learned more about concussion protocol, which is important, and first aid protocol, and some physio protocol, and some X's and O's, and how to press high, and how to get the midfielders to come off of, I don't know, whatever it happens to be. But 0% of my coaching education had to do with teaching strategies that have to do with being in an environment and maximizing my perception or observation skills to the benefit of an individual within the collective. But that's really what I'm supposed to do, both as a father and as a coach and as an educator, and certainly as a mentor. And yet the coaching education program for the last 40 years has not emphasized one of the most fundamental skills I need to do my job. And believe me, Marc, if you think you've made 10 mistakes, I have put my foot in my mouth thousands of times. And I have a couple of people who sent their children to me can tell you I screw up every day with the wrong word at the wrong time, or maybe too much silence, or maybe too much speaking. Yeah, so it is a craft that needs honing, but I had to learn it the hard way, which is through too many trials and errors, probably at the expense of too many players that didn't get the right coaching at the right moment from me, who was supposed to facilitate their success, and I might have prejudiced it. And it's pride, and it's pain, and it's vulnerable, right? And that's what we have to be more than anything else.
My very last point is I've always made the excuse that, hey, it's framework though. But the problem is, to your phrase, if that framework is asked backwards or misses a key component, it's not really framework, it's setting me up for a deficiency somewhere. So I understand the point, yeah, and it's something you tend to justify sometimes because you've been through that learning journey and spent money on it, and you'll always find a way to justify why you've spent that money and the journey you've been on. We tend less to pick it apart and challenge it, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said, I'm old enough. I'm probably twice as old as most of your listeners. So the conversation I'm having isn't with your listeners, it's with myself. I mean, I coached right out of college the way that I was coached, right? It's because it's called survivorship bias, right? It worked for me, right? And I eat bananas, so all my team has to eat bananas now, and they all get into Dartmouth and play D1 college football, soccer, right? But apparently it didn't work well enough because I didn't make it to the national team. So somebody else probably ate pears, right? It's survivorship bias. But we have that. How many teachers in school systems failed out of school? So what do? You reinforce what was successful. Because you were successful, you go back to teach and you taught pretty much the same way because it worked for you. I think we need more teachers that failed out of school because there's many more kids failing out of school that need somebody to understand what it means to not be spoken to understand what doesn't work. And the same with coaching. As soon as I coach the way I was coached, I am reinforcing and validating my own ego. The moment I say, holy bean, are you sure, is the moment I'm going down a rabbit hole of insecurity, vulnerability, questioning, underlying assumptions that get pulled out. And that's not a fun place to be until you get out the other side of that rabbit hole and realize you were better for it. So my conversations changed dramatically when I met Johan, because everything I did when I was coaching was about ball. I had all of the t-shirts, the videos about ball control and ball mastery and team. That's how we were going to win championships. And I was successful as a coach, as a young coach. So, okay, it must have been that. And then I sit down with Johan on several occasions, and he not once mentioned anything about the ball. It was about managing space. And I'm like, okay, here we go. I thought I was, pretty decent as a coach, but I had no idea what, if somebody else looks at the same game differently, how that will manifest an entire different approach to engaging children. And it's disturbing, and it doesn't always work out well, but at least I feel personally that if I could put my ego aside and recognize my failures, that I would be willing to entertain that it could be better. And when I speak to you now, I know that what I'm saying now to you is going to be woefully inadequate in 10 years' time, because God forbid we're stuck in 2020. We should be at the 2030 level of what we know about children, their development, the neuroscience and the socio-psychological science behind that, so that Todd Beane in 2030 would be more effective and look back at his 2020 self and say, boy, did you think you were smart and you didn't know your ass from your elbow? But as I said, I have good people around me that tell me every day that I don't know my ass from my elbow, so I'm used to it. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Even as I preach to you, I know in my own head, conversation is, yeah, that could be BS. And I hope that somebody does prove it to be for the benefit of our children. But in the meantime, I think we are woefully inadequate in the way that we approach education of our coaching staff. And by extension, that bleeds into our interventions being less effective for the children in our charge.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to pick this up, Todd. Obviously, you've referenced the last conversation that we had, and I think I used this phrase as I've heard it used about you a number of times as kind of a referencing you as a champion of change, and that's clearly evident, for anybody to whom you're new to today, how passionate you are about, relentlessly pushing forward in your efforts to kind of break the status quo regarding the use of maybe more traditional coaching approaches or processes. It may blend a little bit about the kind of conversation that you guys have just had, but when people listen to you, I think it's very difficult for them to argue against anything that you have to say, right? And from a perspective of holistic well-being, from a perspective of the character, the cognition piece, it makes a lot of sense to people. So why, in your experience, are people resistant or hesitant to change? And kind of what are the obstacles that you have to try to break down in order to, get them to kind of be prepared to think, I guess, the way that you do about this whole process?
So humankind is wired for adaptability, right? Humankind is wired for adaptability. But a human is wired to resist change. There's a big difference. One is millennium and humankind, and we need to adjust to our environment collectively, as we see in this pandemic environment, or we could perish. So there is benefit. But on a given day, I see people in a pool in the southern part of the United States partying their minds off because as an individual, that's what they do on Memorial Day, right? So this is where you look at the individual is not wired to change. Memorial Day, I party with my friends come hell or high water, pandemic or no pandemic. But for humankind, if we do not adapt culturally and intellectually to our new environment, then we have a chance to perish. So humans do not like change. I think it doesn't work anymore because it was years ago, but someone told me that the only people like change are wet babies and Coke machines. Now I know Coke machines only accept credit cards, so that doesn't work, but you get the idea, right? We are not individually wired for change. And why? Because we anchor on the way that we've been taught the first time. If I tell you something enough and loud enough and often enough, that becomes your anchor. That's not me. I'm not saying me, anybody, right? You can think about your political leaders and what they tell you over and over and over and over. You think about your marketeers and how many signals you have in your head from products that you use and the images. We know that. Once we get you as an individual anchored into any product, service, identity, culture, or identification with your tribe, then it's very difficult to move you out of that, even in the face of logical arguments, scientific research, because it isn't a scientific or logical decision, it's an emotional one. And we make emotional attachments, thankfully we do, that are to the benefit of our loved ones and a benefit to our sanity and our wholeness. But once we anchor ourselves emotionally to an idea, then it's not the idea that's challenged, it's the person. And that's why change is so difficult. That's why change management in any entity, not just in football, is so difficult. That's why those historically that have proposed change with radical ideas like the sun does not revolve around the earth, or that certain people of gender are inferior, or that certain people of nationality or creed or religious belief do not deserve the same, then those people are the first people literally to be potentially slaughtered, isolated, or in today's modern day, tagged and trolled on Twitter, right? So it's human nature. Now the question is, do you want to be the human that at 25 has it figured out and then can just coast to 65? And if you do, whatever course you did, swallow the Kool-Aid and never question it. I want everybody, and I think you can make a good argument against TOVO because I do it in my head all the time, right? You can make a great argument against TOVO methodology about Todd Beane or anything I've said. And when we have that argument, we create the friction in a positive sense. And as long as we respect that it's difficult for us to change and we can be emotional but not tied and anchored to that emotion, you can lead me into a new environment or a new school of thought because you've connected with me emotionally. And the most important emotion is why we coach. If I can convince you that you will be a better coach for the people that you care about most, that you can be more effective for your children, that the exercises you choose matter to their development, that their dependence and their performance is connected and aligned with your decisions, I'm not tapping into your how. I'm tapping into your why, and that moves people, not the X's and O's or the metrics of winning or losing. It is, do you believe right now at 25 or 35 that you are maximizing the potential of every child in your charge so much that you're not willing to listen to conflicting or controversial ideas? I don't ever want to be the guy stuck in the sofa telling everybody else they don't know shit when in fact I'm one of them, right? And I think that's where I need to take the ego check, and I need to have a good argument. And there are great people in your audience that have great arguments about everything and any detail I'm sharing with you. And I'm from New England, so I love it, right? I love it because we're thick-skinned. We have to go through those nasty winters, and we love dialogue because that dialogue is connected to our common why and not because of my individual political stance. And that's how I can respect the US Federation, the CONVB, my friends from there, the English FA, the Dutch. I can respect other people with whom I have a relationship behind the scenes on Twitter, even when people try to put us together, apart or against each other, right? That's the most challenging. Are you so emotionally attached to your how that you are unmovable? And if you are, and going out to preaching to children that they need to be adaptable, shame on us. Shame on us. You be perceptive, but I don't have to be. You be adaptable, but I'm stuck in my ways. You be open to new innovation and research and collaboration and cooperation. You be open to respect and resilience. But me, 25, I got my A license. I'm done, right? It's just absurd to think that I would ever suggest that anybody in coach education be that type of person. Not saying we don't exist. We don't exist on occasion, and we haven't made that error, myself included, first in the line. But it is what holds coaching education back more than our children, ourselves.
So then with all of that said, and the concept of challenging an idea and not challenging a person, Tom's popped up with a question here. There was obviously a kind of a hot topic last week when Romeo Yozak presented on Foundation Coach Ed series, where it's obviously questioning, I guess, the concept of decision and perception action before before performance, or before teaching decision-making skills before technical skills. We've obviously had the conversation before about how do you dismiss the concept that people aren't developing technique within your practice environment, but can you kind of speak to I guess your thoughts? Your thoughts on that more?
So here you raised the question about ideas. Okay, I was looking for it, and I don't want to violate any privacy with Romeo. Romeo, I wasn't trying to be rude to you, Tom. I was just looking for the message from Romeo, right? And it was connected to the message that Romeo and Tom Beyer and I were having as colleagues and professionals, right? Hey, great, keep up the good work. Speak your truth. Literally, speak your truth. I could not disagree with Romeo more on certain aspects, and I could not agree with him more on our why and some of the elements that he believes, the application of the skill in context such that it unrolls in marvelous fashions to build the best possible player. I could not agree with about 95% of what Romeo is doing specifically more. But it's in the 5% that we can respect one another's how and yet disagree. And that's critically important for societies to exist, and it's pretty important for politics to yield to the citizens to which it serves, right? We need to be able to be collegial, to be craftsmen, to speak our truths, to use the research that affords us the best opportunity to make our pitch to the people and to our children, and be different. So I haven't seen Romeo coach in person. I'm sure he's a brilliant coach. I agree with so much of what he does, and I probably agree with who he is as a person even more when I saw him live. And I respect his communication with me and Tom Beyer in Japan and others, even though we're supposedly pitted on the argument that we were having some fun with last week. But I do not agree. Why? Because after I saw an interview with Romeo, with due respect to Romeo, and he made the claim with Saul from my football coach, saying that children do not have the capacity with peripheral visions to make decisions, I was up at 7 in the morning the next day for 6 hours researching foveal cells in the eye, peripheral vision, and citing the sources that he was citing. And I came up with it. And in 1960s, there was one that suggested that potentially young children have more difficulty with peripheral vision. But that same study, in its study, said they have found no physiological difference why that would be the case. And most of it was accredited to that when you ask young children to focus their attention in a clinical laboratory experiment, they have more difficulty than following the instructions. All right, so I can send that to Romeo and say, ha, Romeo, here we go. And he's going to be so intelligent to tell me, yes, but you haven't looked at this. That's friction in a positive sense. I looked at peripheral vision, and I think that I have found the modern research that discredits some of his argument, based not all of his argument, but on that particular point. And he can do the same for me, which he would welcome to do. And we can debate the research on perception action, and it's important at what portion of the how of the training and benefit from it. As a matter of fact, if he doesn't challenge me, I'm poorer for it. And I can dismiss the few people that DM me and told me that, you know what, because they're not part of our dialogue. They don't get it. They don't understand, as they're defending another point of view, that the people who are opposing those 3 points of view are talking with each other, that have great respect for one another, that admire one another, because we see we care more about football and the children in our charge than we do about whether or not 15 minutes of your session is A, B, or C. And that's the message I want to get. Coaching education has to be human, it has to be emotional, but you do have to challenge each other's scientific ideas and the metrics they use to justify performance improvement, which is what we're in the business of doing, learning and joy. So it's a thanks. I'm so glad you gave me the opportunity. So if Tom ever sees this, he knows how much I respect him. I appreciate him sending me his book. And in Romeo, we've spoken, so he knows, hey, we're coaches. We're going to do the best we can. And we're going to have a beer together and have great arguments. And because of those challenging conversations, both he and I are going to be better for it. Well, maybe not him, but certainly I will be better for his experience.
But I think what you've done there is, I think that the point for me is that you're comfortable in defending why you believe what you believe, right? And it's not kind of opinion clouded as fact as much as it is, you know, theoretically underpinned by concepts that you've taken the time to go and look at and learn. And I think it actually blends, Marc, to your first question, and potentially why people are apprehensive about change sometimes. And we spoke to Sarah McQuaid on Tuesday about needing a high degree of declarative knowledge before you can put yourself in positions where you might be comfortable observing or questioning in certain styles, because you need to have the confidence in yourself that, okay, no matter what the issue is that's presented to me, I can defend my why, right? I can go in and explain why we're going to do what we do. So I think it's a superb demonstration of the importance of that.
I'm not going to, because your audience is obviously diligent and vigilant, and they're taking extra time. So I'm preaching to the choir. I could tweet back. I could tweet back and say, "Oh, you're Tom, Marc, you're full of you know what," right? And I could just let it go. Those people are lazy and they don't belong to be in our craft. Those people have to go. If you're so lazy that you can't entertain an idea that's foreign to your own and do your homework, whether it's 6 hours or 6 years, you don't belong in the coaching business, because it's too important what we do. If you're too lazy and your answer is, "I don't like you, Romeo," or "You're selling your course, there has no meaning." If you think the only reason meaning comes from a messenger you like, you belong somewhere else, because you have to get messages. And sometimes they don't come in the messenger that you want, but they're still worth exploring. And in this case, I respect the messengers I mentioned. And because I respect them even more, I'm going to spend 6 hours figuring out what foveal cells do. Right? That sounds crazy. I know my colleague here is laughing at me. He's like, no, who the hell wakes up and spends 6 hours studying research from the 1950s forward on peripheral vision and its effect on children differentiated from adults in a context which can apply to sport? Nobody. That's why my wife tells me crazy. But now I can feel I owe Romeo or anybody, I'm not just using Romeo because you brought that, it doesn't matter. I feel that I have given them enough respect to honor their ideas, to challenge them in a way that isn't demeaning them, humiliating them, or suggesting that they're not intelligent beings using their own sense of order. If you just tweet that you don't like it because that's the way it's always been done, BS. You go do something else and stay away from children. That's not coaching. Coaching is constant honing and improvement of the art and science to which we profess, to which we dedicate ourselves, and ultimately to our why, to nurture the children in our charge. And if we haven't figured out 100%, I think immediately, I think we're in trouble. I know that I am. I'm not even close to sorting out how to be a good coach. I'm just trying to get better than I was when I was 25. And I think I have some success along the way. And I think that we've collectively, when you get a group of coaches like I have on staff, if anything, we have consistency, continuity, and clarity, because we're all educated under the Cruyffian philosophy of football. So our coherency is based upon one brand, knowing that in Italy, they may have continuity, coherency, and consistency with another coach, well-educated coaching staff, who deliver a different brand of football instruction. And that's the beauty of football. as well as the manifestation of the style that you see between Klopp and Guardiola or Mourinho or Quique Setien or any of the other greats that we've had the opportunity to see over the last decade.
Todd, I just want to shoehorn in a last point. I know we're tight on time or over the time. The importance of keeping an open mind, regardless of all the information that comes in, and two not anecdotal stories, two studies that were done in the 50s. One was mapping brains to find the average brain, and one was mapping airmen to find the perfect cockpit size. And over 3,000 airmen were measured in the US to find the perfect cockpit size. So they took all of these measurements, they designed the perfect cockpit, and there were more crashes in the following 12 to 18 months. Basically because only 3% of the actual airmen fit the average size. So all of those measurements, the perfect, the average cockpit or the perfect airman, the perfect cockpit for them, it only fit 3%. And then they did the same thing with mapping for the average brain. They took all of these snapshots of the brain when people were wide up and answering questions. And again, I think it was only 7% when they looked back at the individual maps would only fit onto the map of the average brain. And the book I'm referencing is The End of Average. It talks about the problem with science removing the variables and making the information they want to get out there fit into the study. And also the danger of trying to find averages in multidimensional aspects and elements. So the point you made about going and researching peripheral vision and challenging on methodology, I think what you referenced was the importance of just be open-minded. It can be this. We might have different views. Sometimes it's an amalgamation of the two, but don't take everything you read as that's it. This is the right thing. This is at 100%.
In coaching education, the only thing I would say, and I'm familiar with those stories, it's great examples of the fallacy of humans, which is what we are, right? Whether it's emotionally or cerebrally, we think we can get our brain and be objective. We can't. We think we can objectively evaluate players through recruitment processes and spreadsheets. We can't. We can't do all the things that we profess we do. So we have to come to understand in coaching education, what do I believe is the best element of these footballers such that they can play the game to maximize their potential. And if I believe, in our case, we believe that it's a game of perception and action coupled, we value that so highly that we let that bleed through our how. Romeo also believes, and others will believe, that football is a game of perception and action, and their how will manifest something unique to them. But the conclusive part is this, right? If I go try to teach something that my staff and I don't believe in, if anything children smell, it's inauthenticity. You cannot sell, you cannot get buy-in, you cannot build passion if you do not believe 100% in getting in that spacecraft on Saturday and flying in it. You're not going to get me. I don't love it that much, into that spaceship. But those gentlemen that are going, the women have come before them that have gone into space, they've changed the how. And they've taken notes on the lessons. There's certain things they realize they won't do again because it wasn't effective or potentially fatal. But if I come back to that story of space exploration, we share the why and we share the passion, and we're going to tinker with the how to eliminate the negative elements or the manifestations with our children in coaching. And we're going to try to consolidate and amplify the benefits. And that's where we need the friction between doing it today and exploring it for tomorrow, if that makes sense. And I need to do that with somebody who doesn't just tell me that I'm correct. I need to explore space with somebody else who has some opposing or controversial idea that may touch my ego or may even go so far as to undermine the very assumptions upon which I built my methodology. And that is wonderfully okay.
Todd, I want to close with this. Are you good for one more question?
Sure, go for it.
All right. Based on what you just said, and obviously the importance of believing in your message and the authenticity of it, and and it might be an ideological question to ask, what do you do if people don't always agree? Because we have clubs all across the world, right? With especially in the US, where there's going to be left side, right side, and everything in the middle. How important to, in the coach education process and to the coaches that are on the line, is it to find somewhere that you believe in? If you, what do you do if you necessarily don't, if you can believe in the why but not the how? Like, where's the blend? Because I think based on everything said with background influencing, the way that I was taught, all of the preconceived notions of what you believe to be right, like, just if you could, just curious on your thoughts there of how to kind of, maybe it's resolution, I don't know what it.
So what I would, if I were czar of, soccer education in the United States, I would not have my federation delineate the exclusive owners or disseminators of the how. Right? I didn't believe in the license. I had great respect for Ziggy Schmidt, and I didn't believe in what I was being taught. I only did it because I wanted my A license. Right? And he may not have believed in it, because I don't know. I didn't know him that well. Spent a week with him on a couple other occasions in passing, but nothing else. So I'm not even sure he believed in the federation. He was paid to deliver a certain message, and then maybe he believed it, maybe not. I never got into that intricacy with him. But I come back to this, is if you asked me how I would change it to accommodate the diverse approaches to talent development, I would do it this way. I would put the federation in charge of some fundamental basics of good practices, like get a good educator like a Doug Lemov to teach us about communication. Get a Sarah to talk to us about human management and how we can work with our emotions and our cerebral elements to connect. So take these elements, teach concussion protocol, teach first aid. And we don't want to wing first aid and say, well, I get to do whatever I want, right? I don't want to be frivolous and say everybody's opinion matters on concussion. There's certain elements about core education principles and strategies to implement the game that I think we should all learn for the benefit, the safety and health of our children. Once you get into the how, so those are like the first couple years of your university, right? Let's say you've got to cover, what do they call it? I'm so old, I've been in university so long. Those 2 years, those compulsory courses, right? And then you get to elect a major. If I were czar of the U.S. Federation, but also the Canada Bay and the English FA, I don't think I'm going to get any of those jobs, by the way. But if I were, I would say we might be bringing people to give a foundational education that all educators that work with children, meaning coaches, should understand about first aid, concussion protocol, basic self-health, wellness, and development of children through the ages. And then every coach has 3 or 4 choices for their major. Game model presented by an independent supplier. I don't know. I'll be selfish. TOVO presented by some bean babble guy. I don't know. Some other model, the Belgian way of, I don't know, game play game, or play game play, or practice play game. I don't know. Whatever it happens to be, right? Constraints-led approach. I don't know. But if we say that while those may change over time, there's a core curriculum that makes us better educators in the strategy, connects our why, and gives us a basis from which we depart, then we, with our own passion, can get exposed to different hows, make that decision, and commit to it. The problem I have is that when I walk into an average club in the United States and there's 25 coaches, I see 25 hows. Walk into a Montessori school and look for somebody lecturing all day. It's not going to happen, because from the front door, in the website, before I even get to the front door, I know if I choose a Montessori school, they believe in a Montessori Maria's vision of education, right or wrong. They have trained themselves to implement that education. They have picked their style of education. They have honed the craft on that style of education. And I expect when I knock on that door, I'm going to see a Montessori teacher at that club, at that school. I don't expect my child to have 25 different interpretations of the how under one logo. But I don't expect it at Barcelona, and I don't expect it at Ajax either. And interestingly enough, those 2 clubs share one visionary in common, have stuck to their ideals, have consistency, clarity, and continuity, whether you agree with it or not. and have produced some of the best players this world has ever known. If that isn't an argument in football for consistency, continuity, coherency, regardless of what your style of football is, I don't know what would be. We need to be Montessori schools. Every club has to pick their poison and train their coaching staff in implementing a very well thought out and coherent program so that when the learner goes through it, they're not jumping from Waldorf to Montessori to traditional lectures and making sense of it themselves. Our job is to be meaning makers and bring them along in the journey. And if we give them a consortium of coaches instead of a club and put a logo on it, again, we've done the children in our charge a disservice. And this is tweetable, right? I am not for clubs that give complete autonomy and liberty to coaches to do whatever the hell they want in the name of creativity. It's reckless. And it ends up being ruthless when you take up to account the children that suffer from that plagued paradigm.
Thank you, sir.
I think that was opinionated. I'm sorry about that. No, I'm not really. You know I'm not sorry about it. But...
No, hey, this is there's a reason that you're here, my friend, and there's a reason why people tune in. And it's I don't think it's to be put to sleep with any of the commentary. So look, Todd, if you could, let's just move back, even if people didn't take notice, just put your end slide back on so people can note down where they can find you, those that are left and maybe don't yet follow you on Twitter, where obviously it's a great source of insight from you. Obviously the website there. I guess we'll close this just once more on behalf of myself and Marc and all of Team Beyond Pulse. Everybody that listens now and in the future, Todd, just thank you so much again for the time, insight, passion that you've shared with us once more. It always is greatly appreciated, and you know, always enjoy opportunities to learn from you and speak with you. So yeah, can't thank you enough.
Let me thank you guys have become more than just colleagues and friends, and I appreciate that, and I love the fact that you both will call me out as well and challenge me, and that's what I really appreciate. But more than anything else, can I just finish by saying I know these are trying times. Football doesn't mean anything except for it means a lot to us and the children with whom we work. So let's keep our work in perspective. We share more of our why in common, and our greatest challenge now is to keep our children and ourselves and our families healthy. So yeah, we're babbling about football today, but I know where this rests in the perspective of what we're going through. So thanks for taking the time for giving me this opportunity, and to your listeners for engaging. And as I said, let's look for better days when we get to be back with our children doing what we love.
Perfect. Thank you so much, bud.